The police lied. The crosses in that house weren't broken, they melted from the inside out. After 300 exorcisms, I thought I knew hell. But this entity broke every rule. How do you fight when the demon just smiles and whispers your darkest secret? Subscribe to open my classified files. Lock your doors. The tape starts now.
November 1993 brought a winter to the Ozarks that locals still speak of in hushed, nervous tones. The snow did not just cover the roads, it effectively severed the small community of Blackwood from the rest of the world. Telephone lines went dead beneath the heavy ice, and the few radio towers in the area struggled against relentless atmospheric interference. In this freezing, absolute isolation, a single emergency call managed to break through the static to reach the county dispatch. It lasted exactly 14 seconds, forever altering the lives of anyone who dared to listen to the recording. The voice on the other end of the line did not belong to a panicked victim or a frightened child. It was a man whispering with an eerie, rhythmic calmness that immediately sent chills down the dispatcher's spine. He did not ask for the police, nor did he request an ambulance for the remote farmhouse at the edge of the woods. Instead, he simply stated that the animals had stopped breathing, followed by a low-frequency hum that permanently damaged the station's microphones. There were no neighbors for miles, and absolutely no way out of that suffocating blizzard. Enter Father Michael, a seasoned veteran who had spent 25 years operating within the shadows of the church's most guarded divisions. He was not a man easily shaken, having successfully performed over 300 sanctioned exorcisms across the globe. He had looked into the eyes of madness, addiction, and unexplained malice, always armed with his unwavering faith and the rigid protocols of the Vatican. To him, the spiritual battlefield was a known territory, with predictable rules, specific rituals, and expected outcomes. But the Blackwood case was different. It bypassed the local diocese entirely and came straight from a frantic state trooper. The police escort arrived at Michael's rectory in the dead of night, offering no explanations and carrying a sense of profound dread. They drove in absolute silence, the heavy tire chains grinding against the frozen asphalt as they ventured deeper into the unforgiving wilderness. The officers refused to look the priest in the eye, their faces pale and drawn tight with a terror they could not articulate. They only handed him a heavily redacted incident report, specifically noting bizarre thermal anomalies and severe internal frostbite on the initial responders. Michael read the sparse details under the dim dome light, feeling the familiar weight of his crucifix against his chest. When they finally arrived at the property, the farmhouse loomed in the darkness like a rotting tooth against the pure white snow. There was no smoke rising from the chimney, yet the windows were completely frosted over from the inside out, defying basic physics. The silence surrounding the property was absolute, stripped of even the howling wind that had battered their cruiser just moments before. 2 state troopers stood frozen by the front porch, their weapons drawn but aimed uselessly at the ground, paralyzed by an invisible weight. Michael stepped out into the biting cold, immediately realizing that the air around the house smelled distinctly of ozone and old copper. He approached the front door with the steady, measured pace of a man who had walked into hell hundreds of times before. His leather bag contained the standard tools of his trade: holy water, blessed salts, the Roman ritual, and his personal journals. He mentally prepared the Latin invocations, expecting the usual violent resistance, the foul odors, and the guttural screams of a trapped entity. This was the pattern he knew, the comforting structure of a spiritual war that always ended with the triumph of the divine light. He placed his hand on the freezing doorknob, completely unaware that he was about to step into a meticulously designed psychological trap. The door creaked open, revealing a hallway plunged into a darkness so dense it seemed to swallow the light from the officers' flashlights. The cold inside the house was entirely different from the winter storm outside. It felt deliberate, invasive, and deeply unnatural. Michael's breath plumed in the freezing air as he noticed the deep, methodical gouges carved into the hardwood floor, leading toward the living room. They were not the frantic marks of a struggle, but rather precise, deliberate patterns that resembled ancient, forgotten geometry rather than animal claws. He motioned for the officers to stay back, knowing instinctively that conventional weapons would be worse than useless in this suffocating atmosphere. As he stepped further into the frozen domestic graveyard, the overwhelming silence began to press against his eardrums with a physical pressure. The furniture was completely intact, undisturbed, yet covered in a fine layer of white frost that seemed to pulse faintly in the shadows. He clicked on his heavy-duty flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal a solitary figure sitting motionless in a wooden armchair. It was the owner of the house, staring blankly at the dead television screen, his breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. Michael slowly reached for his stole, whispering a quiet prayer of protection, waiting for the inevitable explosion of demonic rage that always followed. But the rage never came, and the man did not violently contort or scream blasphemies as the priest approached with the holy water. Instead, the figure simply turned his head with a slow, agonizing precision, locking eyes with Michael through the heavy, freezing darkness of the room. The entity inhabiting the man did not exhibit the typical signs of chaotic possession. It radiated a cold, calculating, and overwhelming intelligence. It did not fear the crucifix hanging from Michael's neck, nor did it show any discomfort when the priest began to recite the opening prayers. It just sat there, studying the veteran exorcist with an ancient patience, dismantling decades of theological training with a single, unblinking stare. Michael opened the Roman ritual, his voice echoing steadily off the frost-covered walls as he commanded the entity to reveal its nature. The man in the chair smiled, a subtle, deeply human expression that felt far more terrifying than any monstrous grimace or supernatural display. Without warning, the entity spoke, completely bypassing the expected Latin or guttural growls, using a perfectly calm, conversational, and chillingly familiar tone. It was a voice that Michael had not heard in over 30 years, echoing a deeply buried memory from his own troubled childhood. The exorcism had not even truly begun, and the priest was already losing ground to an adversary that knew exactly how to break him. The entity did not roar or thrash against unseen chains when the first drops of holy water struck its host's skin. Instead, the freezing liquid simply beaded and rolled off the man's face like morning dew on a pane of glass. The man leaned forward slowly, his eyes devoid of any human empathy, and began to speak in a flawless ancient dialect. Michael recognized the guttural cadence of Imperial Aramaic, a dead language that no rural farmer in the Ozarks could possibly know. The words flowing from the man's lips were not random blasphemies, but a precise rhythmic recitation of a highly classified document. As the translation clicked in Michael's mind, a wave of profound nausea washed over his trembling, frost-bitten frame. The entity was calmly repeating the exact verbatim confessions Michael had made to his superiors in Rome over a decade ago. Every moment of doubt, every secret transgression, and every crisis of faith was laid bare in the freezing, stagnant air. The Roman ritual slipped slightly in the priest's grasp as he realized this demon was not interested in fighting the Almighty. It was surgically dismantling Michael's psychological armor, proving with terrifying clarity that his deeply held faith was nothing but a fragile illusion. The traditional rules of spiritual warfare dictated that the demon should be in agony, desperately trying to escape the sacred presence. Instead, the entity seemed perfectly comfortable, observing Michael's rising panic with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a pinned insect. Outside the frosted windows, the muffled sounds of the police cruiser's radio abruptly cut off, plunging the property into absolute silence. Michael was entirely alone in the house, cut off from any physical or spiritual reinforcements as the temperature continued to plummet. The blessed crucifix in his hand felt unnaturally heavy, offering no warmth or protection against the suffocating dread filling the room. Desperate to regain control of the room, Michael raised his voice and commanded the spirit in powerful, authoritative church Latin. He threw more holy water across the space, demanding the entity reveal its true name and submit to divine judgment. The possessed man merely chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that echoed unnaturally against the ice-covered walls of the living room. He wiped the holy water from his cheek, as if brushing away a mild annoyance, his unblinking stare never leaving the priest. The sheer effort of maintaining the holy invocations began to physically drain Michael. his chest burning with every frozen, desperate breath. The entity shifted its tactics again, seamlessly transitioning from Aramaic into the familiar, haunting voices of Michael's deceased loved ones. It mimicked his late mother's weeping, crying out in the exact tone she used on her deathbed all those years ago. The priest closed his eyes tightly, aggressively reciting the Lord's Prayer in an attempt to block out the manipulative, auditory torment. But the voice seemed to bypass his ears entirely, echoing directly inside his skull with an oppressive, undeniable clarity. This was not a simple possession meant to torture a human vessel. It was an elaborate trap designed explicitly to break an exorcist. When Michael finally opened his eyes, the man in the chair had leaned closer, his face mere inches from the priest's trembling hand. The demon whispered in flawless English, stating matter-of-factly that the human body it currently occupied was just temporary rotting meat. It had lured the veteran priest to this desolate wilderness not to claim the farmer, but to systematically consume Michael's lifelong devotion. It wanted the profound satisfaction of watching a holy man willingly surrender his sacred vows in the face of absolute, undeniable nothingness. The profound existential terror of that statement hit Michael harder than any physical blow he had ever endured in his career. As if to punctuate its terrifying declaration, the physical reality of the room began to warp and degrade under the entity's influence. Michael watched in sheer horror as the wooden rosary beads wrapped tightly around his knuckles began to smolder and turn to ash. Across the room, a heavy iron crucifix mounted on the wall did not invert, but began to glow with a sickening, localized heat. The metal softened and deformed, literally melting from the inside out until it dripped onto the floor in a puddle of slag. The sacred symbols were not just being disrespected by the dark presence, they were being physically unwritten from existence before his eyes. For the first time in 300 harrowing exorcisms, Father Michael found himself completely paralyzed by a profound, suffocating sense of helplessness. The Vatican had trained him to fight ancient, roaring evils that despised the light, but they had never prepared him for this. They had never taught him how to combat an adversary that simply did not recognize the authority of the Church at all. His leather-bound manual, his blessed oils, and his decades of rigorous theological study were rendered completely useless in the span of minutes. The man who had confidently walked into the freezing house was rapidly being replaced by a hollow, deeply broken shell of a priest. The possessed man slowly sat back down in the wooden armchair, a look of profound, mocking satisfaction settling over his pale features. He informed Michael that the storm outside was finally breaking and that the authorities would be entering the farmhouse very soon. The entity promised that no one would ever believe the truth of what transpired in that freezing, isolated living room tonight. It then closed its eyes, and the oppressive, localized cold instantly vanished, replaced by the mundane, biting chill of a regular winter draft. The supernatural presence evaporated into the ether, leaving behind nothing but a comatose farmer and a priest whose faith lay in absolute ruins. Seconds later, the heavy front door was kicked violently open, and the two state troopers rushed in with their flashlights sweeping the room. They found the homeowner slumped unconscious in his chair, completely unresponsive, but miraculously still breathing despite the freezing temperature of the house. Father Michael was kneeling on the scarred hardwood floor, staring blankly at the melted puddle of iron that used to be a cross. He did not speak to the officers, nor did he offer any explanation or religious comfort as they secured the disturbing scene. The spiritual battle was over, but the institutional nightmare that would permanently bury the Blackwood case was just about to begin. 48 hours after the chilling confrontation in the living room, the quiet farm was completely swarming with state investigators. The local police had quickly stepped aside, replaced by men in unmarked vehicles who wore dark suits instead of uniforms. Father Michael was immediately escorted off the premises under the strict guise of requiring urgent, specialized medical attention. He watched through the frosted window of an ambulance as the unmarked agents began methodically bagging up the strange evidence. The profound, terrifying silence of the supernatural entity was swiftly replaced by the cold, calculating machinery of a government cover-up. The official perimeter was established miles down the road, keeping any curious locals or passing reporters far away from the truth. Floodlights illuminated the snowy yard, casting long, unnatural shadows as technicians scrubbed the gouged hardwood floors with harsh chemical solvents. The state authorities did not care about the spiritual implications of what had happened to the man in the freezing armchair. They were solely focused on sanitizing a crime scene that defied all known laws of physics and standard forensic analysis. Within hours, the isolated farmhouse was stripped of its history, leaving behind a sterilized shell that held no more secrets. When the official forensic report was quietly filed a week later, it contained a perfectly mundane, easily digestible narrative. The document confidently attributed the homeowner's bizarre physical state to a severe carbon monoxide leak caused by a faulty winter heater. The strange auditory hallucinations experienced by the first responding officers were officially chalked up to localized mass hysteria and exhaustion. There was absolutely no mention of the melted iron crucifix or the deep geometric claw marks carved into the living room floor. The terrifying reality of that night was buried beneath a mountain of bureaucratic paperwork and neatly typed official lies. Father Michael did not fare any better when he finally returned to the supposedly safe confines of his home diocese. The Vatican's response to his detailed, harrowing account of the failed exorcism was not spiritual support, but immediate institutional panic. High-ranking officials arrived in the dead of night, refusing to discuss the theological implications of a demon that could not be cast out. They were terrified of the public relations disaster that would unfold if a veteran exorcist admitted that faith was entirely useless. To protect the sanctity of the church, the man who had faced the devil 300 times had to be silenced. The systematic erasure of Michael's lifework began the very next morning behind the locked, heavy doors of the rectory. Church superiors quietly confiscated his leather-bound journals, his field notes, and every piece of documentation related to the Blackwood anomaly. They demanded his primary audio recorder, wiping the chilling Aramaic confessions and the sounds of the freezing room from existence. The institution that Michael had devoted his entire life to was now treating him as a dangerous liability that needed containing. He was ordered to take a vow of absolute silence regarding the farm, under the strict threat of permanent excommunication. Shortly after the confiscation, the veteran priest was officially stripped of his title and indefinitely suspended from performing any future rituals. He was unceremoniously transferred to a distant, windowless administrative office, assigned to cataloging dusty historical records far away from the public. Michael became a ghost within his own organization, a broken man left alone with the memories of a demon that had smiled at him. The church believed they had successfully contained the spiritual contagion by locking the infected man in a bureaucratic, silent cage. They assumed that without his voice, the terrifying truth of the Ozarks entity would simply fade away into forgotten folklore. However, completely erasing an event of that magnitude from the physical world is an inherently flawed and impossible task. Traces of the horrifying truth survived in the margins, hidden away in dusty filing cabinets that the men in suits overlooked. The local sheriff had managed to snap one distorted Polaroid of the melted cross before his camera was forcibly confiscated. An early medical report from a rural clinic clearly documented impossible, severe internal frostbite on the initial responding state troopers. These fragmented pieces of forensic evidence quietly waited in the dark, painting a terrifying picture that entirely contradicted the official narrative. The most critical mistake made by the authorities was vastly underestimating the resilience of old, analog police dispatch technology. While the church wiped Michael's primary tapes and the government sealed the farmhouse, no one thought to check the county radio logs. Deep in the basement of the local precinct, the original cassette recording of that 14-second 911 call remained perfectly intact. The audio tape captured not only the chilling whisper of the caller, but also the low-frequency hum that defied all audio engineering. That single neglected cassette tape became the undeniable proof that something profoundly unnatural had breached the quiet isolation of Blackwood. Father Michael, despite his broken faith and institutional exile, also committed one final desperate act of silent rebellion before his transfer. Knowing that his superiors would demand all his equipment, he had secretly duplicated his personal audio recording of the failed exorcism. He hid the secondary cassette tape inside a hollowed-out theological textbook ensuring it would survive the Vatican's meticulous, unforgiving purge. He never dared to listen to the recording again, terrified of the ancient voice that had weaponized his most intimate secrets. But he kept the tape safe for decades, waiting for a time when the world was finally ready to hear the truth. Now, nearly 30 years after the freezing winter storm battered the Ozarks, those forgotten black boxes have finally been opened. The redacted files, the discarded Polaroids, and the hidden cassette tapes have slowly leaked out from the shadows of the institutions. We are no longer relying on ghost stories or cheap internet rumors to understand what happened to the veteran priest. We have the raw, unedited audio of a man realizing that his God could not protect him from the dark. The true horror of Blackwood is not just what the demon did, but the massive lengths powerful men went to hide it. Father Michael passed away quietly in a sterile hospice facility years later, carrying the terrifying weight of that winter night entirely alone. He never stepped foot inside a church again, fully aware that the polished marble and stained glass offered absolutely no sanctuary from what he had witnessed. The entity in the Ozarks did not need to slaughter the residents of Blackwood to achieve its dark, highly calculated victory. It successfully proved that when humanity faces true primordial darkness, our sacred rituals and government authorities will simply turn their backs and hide the evidence. The institutions we blindly trust to protect our bodies and our souls are ultimately just as terrified of the unknown as we are. The physical evidence from the Blackwood anomaly is finally out in the open, but our deeper investigation into these cover-ups is only just beginning. I have acquired a massive archive of leaked Vatican dossiers, redacted police reports, and corrupted analog audio tapes waiting to be meticulously decoded. If you have the stomach to confront the buried truths that powerful men desperately want to keep hidden, subscribe to this channel and join the investigation. Make sure your doors are locked, turn down the lights, and prepare to examine the cold, hard proof for yourself. We are opening these forgotten case files one by one, and once you hear what is truly on these tapes, there is no turning back.